Welcome to another episode of the Journey Podcast. The Journey Podcast is all about sharing the journeys of purpose driven individuals from all walks of life who are following their passion and fulfilling the purpose in their own unique way. And I'm your host, Risa Kawamoto. In today's episode, I'm having a conversation with Jess Badley. Jess is actually the wife of John Allen, who was a guest in my 4th episode, and he also interviewed me in the last episode as well. Jess is a director of people and resources at the British Society for Rheumatology. And in her words, she is particularly interested in the links between well-being, flexible working, and innovation, and how this can transform an organization's culture and approach towards work. She is also a trustee for Yes Futures, a charity where they empower young people to believe in themselves and discover their personal potential. And she also acts as mentor on the Chartered Institute of Personal and Development Mentoring Scheme. Jess is my go-to person for any HR and leadership related questions I have because I really love her approach to people management and creating a positive, effective, inclusive workplaces. In our conversation, you'll hear how she developed her career to where she is now and how she navigated some of the challenges as she stepped into a leadership role. She also shares her tips and advice for inclusive recruitment and working cultures, as well as advice for people wanting to completely change their career. She has a lot of wisdom to share, and I'm sure you'll learn a lot from our conversations. Hi, Jess. Welcome to the Journey Podcast. I am so excited to have you here today for you to share your inspiring journey with our listeners. So, yeah, how are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. I'm glad it's nearly the weekend, but I've had a good week, so all good with me.
Yes. This podcast episode will probably go out around February, March time in the new year in 2023. But yeah, we are actually recording this just before Christmas. So yeah, I am really excited to have some time off during Christmas and the new year. I'm sure you had too. Um, so also like I would love for you to share like where you are joining from today.
Yeah, sure. So I'm joining from Leigh-on-Sea, which is near Southend.
I'm always jealous and envious, I guess, that you are near the sea. I guess I grew up near the sea in Japan, so I always love the sea and swimming in the sea. So I'm always envious when people tell me they live near the sea. I told your husband, John Allen, about this as well. So I would love for you to share a little bit about your background and anything you like to share about growing up in your early years.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in the East Midlands, in a really tiny place called Rutland, which is, if you know it, you've probably been cycled around Rutland Water. That's pretty much the only thing there is to do there. So when we were growing up, we spent the whole time just planning how quickly we could move away from the area because it's very pretty. It's lovely if you like walking and all those sorts of things. But obviously, when you're growing up, that is the last thing you care about. So it was a very lovely childhood because it was a very safe place, lovely outside space. It's quite rural. Um, but yeah, we did spend our whole time planning how we were going to get out of Rutland and go somewhere else.
Well, when you say we, is that you and your friends?
Yeah, so yeah, quite a big group of friends that I've had from kind of, well, nursery school really, that we're all still in touch with, which is lovely. And actually a few of them still live around that area. So they went away to university but then came back. So yeah, there's still quite a few of us in touch, which is nice that we've stayed friends for quite a lot of years now.
So what sort of thing that you are planning to get out of where you live? Was there any strategic plan involved?
I mean, that no, there absolutely wasn't. I think all of like me and my group of friends all wanted to go to university. We knew that. And so I went off to Durham, which is quite a long way from Rutland. So did a good job getting further away from there. Um, yeah, and then from there I just really moved around based on jobs. So I've lived in lots of different parts of the country. I lived in Portsmouth for a bit, lived in Reading for a bit, also up in Newcastle, and then in London for a long time as well. And then finally we've landed here by the sea, which is lovely.
So when you were growing up, did you have any passion or anything that you were so interested in like doing, anything you enjoyed doing?
Yeah, lots of things actually. So my mum always says that when I was a child, I was one of those children that wanted to join everything. So if there was a club at school, if there was a trip somewhere, I'd always be one of the kids that was like, yes, I want to go and do that. She'd be like, okay, like you're out every night after school, but fine. Um, yeah, so I really liked doing a lot of sports when I was at school. So loved playing netball, loved doing trampolining. They were probably my favourites. Um, but yeah, I was also just quite interested in seeing things. Um, and I've always really been interested in kind of English and history, I guess, as subjects at school. They were probably my favourites, I would say.
Did you have anyone like you admired or anyone that like really taught you something that you felt really inspired or anywhere really like at school or yeah.
So I would say probably not with sports. I think it was only later that I kind of got more interested in other, professional sports players. But yeah, that's never really been where I've got inspiration from, I guess. Um, like I love watching the England netball team play now, but I'd struggle to name any players, I would say. Um, so yeah, I think probably my inspiration when I was growing up definitely came from my parents, and how they brought me and my brother up. So uh, they both worked, so we always had I think a really great example around that, which was great. But yeah, we always still are a close family as well, so could always talk to them, could always go for advice and know that it would be, honest advice. Not mean, but if it was like even kind of decisions at school, so like which subjects to do at GCSE or A level, knowing that you could always go and talk to them about it and they'd give an opinion, but also they would still let us make those decisions for ourselves as well.
So what did you study, whether your A levels or degrees at university?
So for A levels, I did. So I think we were the first year where there was AS levels were introduced, which
Mm.
are now not a thing anymore because it's all changed again since then. So it meant that we ended up doing like 1 year of a topic that we then didn't carry on. So I did French for the first year
Mhm.
and then dropped that because it was just much harder than any of the other subject I was doing, because obviously it's in a different language. And while I would love to say I'm really good at other languages, I'm really just a bit lazy with the learning of them. So I'd love to be good at them, but just, knowing yourself, I am a bit lazy when it comes to that, especially like, learning verb tables, things like that. But the subjects I really loved, so I did history, which I then went on to do at university. But at A level, I also did law, politics, and geography.
Oh wow. Okay, I didn't know that at all. Well, I didn't know what you studied at university at all. So how was your university life like? So you left your home town. Is it town or is it
It is a town,
is it town?
yes.
Okay. And I guess it's your first time moving away from your parents and living in your own kind of place. Were you living in a campus or were you renting a room in a student house? What was it like?
Yeah, it was great actually, and I really loved it. So in the first year, they at Durham they have kind of halls of residence, so that's quite nice because they're all spread around the city, and so you meet people very easily. Like on your first day, your first week, it's just so easy to make friends. So
Mhm.
you've got kind of a group of friends who where you live, but also you've then got friends on your course as well. So that was lovely. And then in the second year, then we moved out and kind of rented accommodation as well. So I really enjoyed that. I loved the freedom of being able to do what I wanted. And like I said, I did history and I loved the course. I thought it was just really interesting. And obviously the autonomy that you have if you do something like usually in arts subjects at uni is you don't have very much contact time, as in like
Mm.
kind of teaching. A lot of it is you just go off and do your own research, do your own reading, and that really suits me. I much prefer to study like that, and have kind of carried that approach on when I've done any studying in past uni as well.
Mm, yes. And did you know what you wanted to um, be in terms of like your profession and the job, like the types of job that you wanted when you graduate university?
No, not at all. I had so little idea. um, but I'm also a real planner, so uh, it's unusual for me not to have, I guess, a goal for the next. Well, it depends. Could be anywhere from like the next 6 months to the next 5 years. And definitely when I was at university, it was kind of drilled into us that in your third year you need to start thinking about what job you're going to get, which was really helpful. So I think I just thought, well, I'll try and just get onto a graduate scheme because they're quite generic. Um, and that is what I did. So I went to work for a company called Explore Learning, and they essentially you go in as a manager and they train you in all aspects of running a business.
Mm.
And it's working with children and young people, which I already knew that I liked doing. So I'd done that quite a lot at university. And so, yeah, I kind of ended up doing that, I guess. Um, which I did really enjoy. It gave me a great grounding for my career since then. But I think if at university you'd said to me in 10 years' time you'll end up being a HR professional, I would not have believed you. I would have said that's not my skill set. I'm not interested in that.
Mm.
Um, who would work in HR? That sounds like a rubbish career.
But I guess so you said so it was so you it was it like a program that you joined and they train you as a manager and teach you how to build a business for yourself, or was it for like running business for other organizations?
So essentially they teach you how to run their kind of tuition centres.
Mm.
So everything from kind of, how to market it in the local community, how to manage a team, how to put a budget together, and how to, manage a rota, because we had a lot of staff that came in to work with the children, and the evenings and weekends. So there was really lots of different aspects that are just useful for any management career,
Mm.
really. And they had quite a structured program around how they did that, and they at the time were aimed at people coming straight out of uni. So they kind of had a very very slick program really around how to develop people, what they wanted you to get out of it at each stage. So it
Mm.
was quite structured, which was helpful for me at the time.
Yeah, that sounds like a really great yeah, way to get into your career, I guess. Or yeah, because yeah, I would have probably enjoyed that in my early 20s just to get understanding of how you run a management or a business is really interesting to learn that from the beginning, from the early stage of your career. So you said you were doing a bit of work around working with young people, children and young people when you were at university. What sort of work did you do?
So the university were doing a lot of outreach around the local community, because around Durham and Newcastle there's some communities which are really deprived economically. There is a really high proportion of children and young people who, if they wanted to go on to further education, they'd be the first generation of their family to do that. And the university were really trying to encourage social mobility. And so they put on lots of kind of taster days or summer schools, summer camps, where those students would come and basically experience what it's like to be at university.
Mm.
So some of that was just talking to the students about what it's like doing like we'd go to a few lectures, things like that. But quite a lot of it was trying to build their confidence up as well. So especially where we had like the summer schools, things like that, they might be with us for a couple of weeks. So we were doing much more around that self-belief and,
Mm.
you know, them understanding that just because they don't know anyone that's been to university, they're still going to be absolutely able to get there if that's what they want to do. So yeah, I really enjoyed that.
Okay, that sounds really interesting, and that's really helpful for young people who are thinking of going to university, or what is it like to be at university. I didn't know that sort of thing existed actually.
Yeah, and I think it's good because, and equally, not everyone wants to go to university. So we had some students that came along thinking they did want to do that, but then we would say, well, there's other routes to get to the career that you might want.
Mm.
And so actually, if it means that they then maybe go and do an apprenticeship or whatever they choose to do, then you know, I think that's helpful as well in terms of them and getting them on the path that's right for them.
Yeah, and did people give that guidance as well? So like this is if you are not sure about university routes, then there's also alternative route for you. So did they give guidance around that as well?
Yeah, and I think because their teachers at school were also, you know, really good at doing that because they would
Mm.
know their students so well, so they can make more tailored suggestions. But yeah, I think it very often came up, like I said, when we did the longer periods with the students, and they would say, you know, I'm enjoying this week, but actually, it's made me think I don't like chemistry that much anymore, or actually what you said about, you know, working in this way isn't going to be for me, and actually I would rather go into work quicker. So
Mm.
I think, yeah, I think we just were tried to be as open as we could in conversations with people. So yeah, because I think of course we wanted to encourage anyone who wanted to go to university, but equally the last thing we would want to do is say to someone like, you must go, it's the only route, you know, if you want to have a good job, because we know that's not true.
Mm. Yes, but yeah, I do feel like the society kind of does kind of encourage people to get higher education, university degree, and that's the way that you get a good job, you know, your first job, and then build your career. Um, yeah, so it's interesting to know that that
Yeah.
university is doing that sort of thing. So do you think that working with children and young people at university and also in your first job impacted like where like you choose your career in future?
Yeah, I think it probably did. I think I've always enjoyed working with children and young people, but equally, I've never wanted to just do that. So I don't think I'd be a great teacher, for example. But I do like kind of the learning and development side of my job. So if I'm working with adults, for example, I really like doing kind of development sessions with them or coaching and mentoring. So I think probably the main things I got from that job and my first job was around, I think, transferring those skills
Mm.
into another role, really. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And how did you then kind of progress your career from there to where you are now?
Yeah, so I mean, I always think it's a bit of a wiggly line. It's not it's not very obvious as a career path. So once I left Explore Learning, I went and ran a children's nursery in London.
Oh, wow.
And that was it was such such a steep learning curve, but in a good way. So yeah, so I was running the nursery, reporting directly to the trustees, and just because of where it was in London, we had 80 children on the roll on the register, and we had, I think, 51 different languages that those children could speak. So it was brilliant because we could do so much around being inclusive and the children learning from each other's cultures, which was really great. But also in terms of then their parents couldn't all speak English. And
Mm.
trying to translate a nursery policy through a 4-year-old is really quite tricky. So learning about how you communicate with in different ways with different people, that was really valuable, I think. And I also think the working in early years as a sector you have staff who are really, really committed and who are great at working with these children and making sure that they are developing, and it's all based around following the children's interests, which is really great and is absolutely the right thing to do. But the sector really struggles because it's really underfunded by the government. It means parents have to pay extortionate nursery fees. And even then, it is incredibly hard to even make the books balance in any sort of nursery sector. And we were standalone, we weren't part of a chain, so there was no backup from anywhere. And so I got really good really quickly at budgeting, at fundraising, which I'd
Wow.
never done before. I didn't know how to write a bid for a trust to ask for money. So had to get good at that very quickly, because otherwise we were going to go bankrupt and everyone would lose their job. So yes, and then loads around running a business there that I hope
Yes.
I won't need to get to that stage ever again.
Did you enjoy that, writing bids and fundraising, running business?
Yeah, so I did. I think I enjoyed it in my next few jobs where it was less stressful, where it was less kind of like, if I don't get one of these bids landed, I don't know how I'm going to pay people next month. It's much more enjoyable when you're not at that stage.
Mm,
And I think what I realised is I much preferred it when I could go and talk to the funders directly.
mm,
So it depends if when you're fundraising. So sometimes you write bids and you send them off, someone reads them, and it's all done in a written format. But some funders, some trusts, some grant making foundations will ask you to go and present to them. And I always found that easier, had a much higher success rate doing it that way. And I think for me that's carried on because I still really like doing things like public speaking. So, I've done a few conferences, speaking events over the past few years. So yeah, it definitely taught me that I enjoyed that part of it.
mm.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, wow. Yes. Yeah. I know. Yeah, the fact that you are really good at public speaking and you also enjoy it as well. Yeah, so that's where you got it from. So, were you ever nervous or like got anxious when you know that, next day you got to pitch?
Yeah, and I think especially the first few times, yeah, really anxious, would practice it loads. And I think especially, yeah, when I first started, I thought that I kind of had to just be able to remember it all and that it had to be perfect. But then actually I realized that no, it's fine. And the more natural you come across, the more likely you are to build that rapport with someone who might give you the money anyway. Because especially if it's someone you haven't met before and you're not going to meet again, probably,
Mm,
the more natural you come across, the easier it is normally for people to trust you or believe what you're saying. So I think it's like, I think everyone gets nervous to some extent when you're speaking, no matter how many times you've done it. I think
mm,
you probably get better at hiding that. um yeah, but yeah, I was definitely, the first few times I did it, really nervous. um and wouldn't tell anyone I was doing it. So like the senior team where I was working, they would know, obviously I was going off to do a presentation because they need to know where I was, but I wouldn't have told anyone else until afterwards. um yeah, just because sometimes people are like, oh, are you nervous about it? And you're like,
mm.
well, if I wasn't before, now I am, because you've reminded me, thanks very much.
That's a good point. Yes, the good point around like you get better at hiding how nervous you are, I guess. More you do, I'm sure you build that confidence. But I guess you also get better at hiding and kind of put the kind of presentation mask on and just go and do it, isn't it? So were you successful with fundraising?
Yeah, we did. So I had a target that I had to reach, like I said, for us to stay existing,
Mhm.
as an earlier setting. So yeah, and we did hit that. And actually, then when I left that business, I got another job in a children's centre, as their operations director. And when I left, that organisation, it was still standing and it's still going today. So
Amazing. That's good. That's great to know, isn't it? To know that you've done the work.
yes, didn't leave them in the lurch.
Okay. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. I did not know about that at all. So it's so interesting to hear about it. So from there, how did you get into HR?
So my next job after that, then, as I said, I went and became an ops director
Mhm.
for a children's centre. So that was a slightly bigger business. There was 3 nursery sites. So yeah, probably we had about 80 staff altogether. So a little bit bigger than the standalone nursery. But my role there was, well, same sort of things in there, but just on a bigger scale, I guess. And that's where really I was able to spend a bit more time on the HR side of it, because I had a bigger team as well to support me, so I wasn't having to do as much by myself. So the finance side of it, obviously, as an ops director, you're still overseeing that. You're still overseeing all the building bits, like when things
Mm.
break or getting rent from people. Um, but that really as well was the first time that I realised that the HR side of it was the bit I really enjoyed. Um, I do like the finance side of it. It can be really satisfying when you make something work, or when you or equally when you support someone else to understand how to do their budget for the first time. The building bit, like, I've had it in lots of jobs. It's been one of my responsibilities. It's never going to be something that I love doing, managing buildings, but it often does fall into an ops remit. So, I've done it a lot. That's fine.
Mhm.
I can do health and safety, but it's not a passion. But yeah, the HR side of it really was like trying to support the staff to develop, making sure they had a lot of support, because while working in, like I said, in the earlier sector is really rewarding, it's also really challenging. And so making sure that those staff are as supported as possible, that's
Mm.
when I first thought, actually, maybe I want to start to specialise into a HR path now.
Mm. And I feel like that almost kind of connected to what you were doing at university to those young people, isn't it? Like, and I guess HR is more people focused, whereas I guess building you also need to deal with people, I'm sure, but it's more of a yeah building. So
Yeah,
yeah,
it's just something's broken again, let's fix it.
yeah. So while you were in that role, did you have any mentors or anyone, any coaches or anyone that supported you through that transition into HR or through that career path that you wanted to pursue?
So no, I didn't actually. I really wish that I had, because that would have been really helpful. Um, so what I decided to do was to uh, go and do a HR qualification. So there's the CIPD, which is HR professional body in the UK. So I decided to go and do the level 7 qualification and just do that while I was working. So that was helpful. I mean, you get kind of obviously lectures on the course. There was, I think you could access like one of the, I guess, more the pastoral side if you needed support, but there wasn't really mentoring within that. And it wasn't until I moved to my next role, which was a HR role, that I then accessed a mentor. CIPD do a lot of mentoring
Mm,
schemes. So that was probably the first time then that I'd accessed someone like that. And that was really useful for me, I think, both in terms of thinking ahead of what a HR career could look like, but also because he was way more experienced in HR. And so if I had like a HR issue, I was just having that sounding board to talk it
mm.
through, which was really helpful.
Yes, and I'm sure being in HR department, there are loads of issues. And it can be quite emotionally draining as well because you're dealing and supporting your employees and people. And yeah, so I'm sure having a mentor really helped you with that as well. Um, so from there, I know that you always enjoyed working in charity sector, if I'm correct.
Yes.
How like were you always interested in that charity sector or voluntary sector when you were younger, or is this something that kind of you discovered in your early career?
Yeah, I think it was probably early career stages. So I always did a lot of volunteering work, like at school and at uni, but I hadn't really thought, oh, definitely the charity sector is where I want to go. And I think that was probably because I was aware then that the pay does tend to be lower than if you work in the private sector, and the benefits are lower than if you work in the public sector. So I think it was never kind of my aim. And the first role I worked in was private sector. Um, Yeah, and I think it was only then when I moved into early years. So that early years can be across all three sectors, but the first nursery that I ran was a charity. And I suppose, yeah, being in that and then realizing that actually, if you work in a charity, it's really quite easy often to make sure that your staff really buy into what you want to do as a team, as an organization. So having that link to your organization's mission is
Mm,
so much easier in a charity organization. And I think a lot of people are attracted to the charity sector for that reason. So you do
mm.
end up working with really passionate people who really want to make a change, make an impact. And that definitely is motivating for me.
So was it easy to go from charity sector to private sector, then back to charity sector? I feel like quite a lot of people, including myself, I always wanted to work in charity sector or public sector when I was in the private sector. So
Yeah.
like from your experience, like how easy has it been for you to kind of switch, different sectors in your career?
Yeah, so I think I've actually found it relatively easy. And also because even within the charity sector, obviously that's huge, and there's lots of different types of charities, and some people like to, stay in one part of it, where tried to move around a little bit. And I think really it comes down to, if you're trying to apply for a role, I think it's making sure that you've addressed that in your cover letter if you're asked for
Mm,
one. So it's really obvious for whoever is reading your CV and cover letter, one, that you want to move, but also why. And then having a really strong answer at interview, because usually people will ask that. But I think it's usually a genuine interest, because a lot of people do change sectors now. So
mhm.
more and more people can sort of imagine why you might want to do it. So I think so long as you have got a clear idea of what that is and you can articulate that it's definitely possible. Yeah.
Yes, and from your experience, like when you are in a charity sector, did you have many people applying for roles in your organization where their experience is not in charity sector or public sector, but from like completely different area? Did you have many applications from those people?
So I would say more over the past few years, but
Mm,
I also think that's because wherever I've worked as well, we've made a point of saying it doesn't matter which sector you're from, because
mhm.
quite often in job descriptions, and it really annoys me, but people can do what they want, but often it will say, as a desirable part of the person specification, it would be great if you've worked in a similar sort of organization before. And that really annoys me, because I just think it's rubbish. Because you can learn knowledge in a new sector. Anybody can do that really quickly. I think it's the skills that you'll bring in, the behaviors, how you act, and your values. That's what's going to say whether or not you're good at the job
Mm,
that you're applying for. Um, but equally, I think because people often do think, oh well, if it says on the job description they want someone from this sector, then I'm not even going to get an interview. I won't bother applying. And then you miss this massive section of people that would bring in a new viewpoint into your organisation. So now, like I said, anywhere I work, our recruitment policy is that we don't ask for people in the same sector, and we would try and explicitly say it doesn't matter if you haven't worked in this sector before. If you've got this, if you've got these skills, or if we're asking for experience, then please apply anyway. And I've found if you put that explicitly in, then people, take you at face value. So you get that whole range of really great applicants coming through.
Yes, I completely agree. And yeah, I would love for you to have in our HR department where I work. Um, and create all these new policies for us. That would be amazing. So I would love to hear from Leo. I now you are a director of people and operations, I believe. Did I get that
People and
correct?
resources, but yeah,
People.
it is.
Okay.
It's basically operations. Yeah.
So I would love to know how you got into leadership role and were there any challenges as you were building your career and trying to get into more of a leadership role?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think probably the first leadership roles I had were back in kind of the earlier sector. So then so that meant in a charity, it often means you're working with a board of directors who are usually called trustees. Um, so yeah, so I've done that now for the past sort of 5 or 6 roles. Um, and I think it's really interesting because it means you get a much broader view across the whole organisation rather than just your area, which is often why a lot of people want to move to that level. And I think it was quite challenging the first time. And I think I guess recruitment practices have changed over that time because we're going back a few years. But I think some of the challenges I faced were people, well, I say assuming, but I did have in one interview a question that someone asked me was, well, why do you think you can do this job? Because you're much younger than anyone else that works here. So why do you think they would listen to you? Um, which, now I hope no one would ask. But
Yes.
he was deadly serious in that he didn't think I could be a leader because I was younger than the people I would be managing. And I thought I gave a very good answer to that, but he clearly was never going to hire me for that role anyway. So I didn't get that role. But I did come across that a couple of times with recruiters as well, where they had said, yeah, your CV is really great, and I think you did a really good interview with me, but I know the client is looking for someone who's more experienced. And I'm like, well, I can't get that apart from just by carrying on living, basically, because like I
Hmm.
can't change my age. So
Yes.
if you are just basically saying, well, you can only be a director once you're over the age of 40, that's not a great way to do it, I think.
No.
So that was definitely a challenge that I found early on. But not everywhere is like that. And then when I moved into HR roles, I kind of had to go sideways to get into HR as a career. But that worked really well for me because, like I said, I was studying at the same time, and trying to work full time and study is quite a lot. So that sideways move worked really nicely for me. And then in that organisation, I had the opportunity to step up into the leadership team from there after when I've been there about 8 months or so. So yeah, I was really lucky that we had an organisation that believed in me, and we had the opportunity to step up into the leadership team there.
Would you be able to share like what was your answer to this person in the interview when he said yeah, when he kind of asked that question around your age?
Yeah, sure. So so there was about like 5 seconds where I was thinking, did he say that out loud? And then I'd said, no, I don't think that would be an issue at all. Because a team doesn't follow a leader based on how old they are. They follow them based on how good a leader they are. So if I haven't managed to bring them along with me, if it's a change I'm making or if it's a new mission that we're setting, that's got nothing to do with how old I am. That's how good I am at building relationships. It's my leadership style. It's understanding the organization and how the team works. And you can do that at any age. You can have really great young leaders. You can have people in their 50s and 60s who are still terrible leaders. So really, it is about the skills and how you behave and how you role model, far more than how many director job titles you might have had over the past 15 years or so.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. Sorry, I had to ask that question.
It's fine. He didn't love it. He was just like, hmm. So I
I'm
was
sure
like,
he didn't love it,
I
yeah.
don't think I want this job anyway.
So you mentioned age being one of the challenges when you were stepping up into leadership role. Did you have any challenges being a woman and wanting to step up as a leadership role as well?
So sometimes, yeah, and I think it comes out in different ways. And I think I've never had an experience where someone has directly discriminated against me for that. But I think what I found sometimes is you might be in a boardroom, in a meeting, and I guess it's the microaggressions that come in. So, for example, if you're in a meeting and you sometimes I might have been the only female there,
Mm.
but I'd be the only person sometimes that maybe someone would interrupt halfway through a sentence. So I'd be the only person having to say, I need you to wait until I've finished this point. You've just asked me a question and I'm answering it. Please let me get to the end and then you can clarify. And it's like, initially, I suppose I didn't really notice it, but the more it happens, the more you think, well, I am the only person getting interrupted.
Mm.
Um, or even stuff like, well, I think probably most women I know being expected you'd be the one that go and make the tea. It's
Mm.
like, come on. Like, I'm
Yes.
pretty sure you can all use a kettle. If you want a cup of tea, go and make it. Yeah, so I think definitely found more of that. Um, and on occasion, I suppose it's felt to me that I've had to work harder to get an idea accepted, um, by a board or by a leadership team. Um, but it's quite hard to quantify that, isn't it? Because sometimes it might have been that I just didn't articulate it very well. And so actually it took me a bit longer because I should have changed approach or should have changed tactics. But sometimes I don't think it's that at all. And I
Mm.
think in HR, there's quite a lot of discussions that go on around how much influence HR has in a business and how important they are seen as. So I think that plays into it too. But a lot of HR professionals, like the majority of us, are female, apart from directors who in the HR
Mm.
profession tend to be male. So there's that gender bias kind of all the way through, really.
Mm. Yes, that's so interesting. Like what you said about HR department. I do notice that tend to be female, more female dominated. But then when you look at director level, they're all male, tend to be male. So yeah, that's interesting. Um, so I have a couple of questions kind of that I'm really curious to hear from you.
Sure.
So in your opinion, what are the different leadership qualities that make effective, inclusive leaders?
That's a really good question. I feel like I've written essays about this as part of my my qualifications. Um, so so I think there's a couple of key things really. I think one is trying to have as good an understanding of yourself as you can, because obviously none of us is perfect as much as we might like to think that we're amazing. So and I think it's just understanding what things you're less good at, so that, for example, you can make sure that your team have those strengths around you, or you working with your peer group to, even it out a little bit, I guess. Um, and I think around, yeah, like you're saying, around being inclusive, I think some of that is often just challenging how you might work. So to be able to do that, I think obviously you've got to try and create a setting for all of your team where they can feed back to you if something's not right, so that they have this really high level of psychological safety. And that is quite hard for people to do, because obviously you don't really want to be criticizing your boss. That's quite a difficult thing for a lot of people, especially if they might be new to a role or they might be newer in their career. That confidence and feeling safe enough to say, actually, you might have messed this up, or I just don't like how we're working together. I think that is hard, but I also think it's really important, and it's usually how you learn best as a leader, when someone feeds back to you and says, "This wasn't great." So I think that's really important to do. And obviously it takes time, you've got to build trust. And then when someone does give you that feedback, you have to react in a good way. So you can't be annoyed with someone for giving you feedback when you've asked for it, even if you don't agree with it. So I think that to me is really important, and to keep doing it as well, because when I'm new into a role, I would do that automatically and try and, build those with my team. I think once you've been in a role a few months or a few years, it can be quite easy to forget to keep doing that and keep checking back again, because ways of working change all the time, and what individuals need from you as a manager or a leader change all the time as well.
Mm. And from your experience, how did you kind of create that working culture so that your team can trust you and feel comfortable speaking up and, hey, Jess, you done this and I don't really agree with it. To be able for your team to do that, you need to create sort of working culture, I believe. And how did you create that?
So I think one of the things that I think usually works quite well is when I'm first meeting a new team and meeting individuals, is to try and create a space to do that and to explicitly talk about it.
Mm.
So, and there's different templates, tools available. Generally, I would just, when I've had the first kind of one-to-one with someone, I would say, what's your working preferences? Like, how do you prefer to be managed? How do you prefer to get feedback? How often do you want us to catch up? And just try and set those, I guess, those expectations, but also try and really understand how that person likes to work. Because it could be as simple as actually they prefer to kind of get any, I don't know, instructions or tasks via email, but some people hate that. They would just much prefer to get that in a one-to-one once a week. So even just understanding something like that and then doing how that person prefers it, I think that sets a good tone for the management relationship. And I think within a team as well, like at team meetings, just always trying to have space and deliberately inviting feedback or thoughts, and trying to have different channels for people, because some people are confident enough to say, oh, but what about this, or we could do it this way, and they'll do that in a meeting, whereas other people aren't going to do that. So they might prefer just to be able to put comments on a document or just to email me separately. So I think just trying to, just be really clear that is a behavior that I value and that I expect from people, and like I said, then when you first get that feedback, when someone is brave enough to put their head up and say, actually, I don't think we should be focusing on that next month, I think we should do this, that they can see then my reaction to that is going to be like, okay, that's a good point, let's talk about it some more, and then following up on it. So yeah, if we're going to change it, great. If you change something, people can see that you'll take the feedback on board, or if you're not, then explaining why not, so that it isn't just sure, give me all the feedback you want, I don't care, but you can give me the feedback, because that's obviously really unhelpful.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think it's like really helpful for everyone to hear that. um, so if you could become a CEO of the organization or a founder of your own organization, what sort of organization would you create?
Oh, that's a really good question. So I guess I could tell you from like what I would like it to be like for people that worked there.
Mhm.
So I would want to create an organization where it was very flexible for people in terms of working hours and things like that. I'm really interested in the move towards working less hours, so the 4-day week, etc. We're actually starting a trial where I work now from January. We're going to trial doing a 4.5-day week, so I'm really excited about that. But I think, an organisation I was creating, I would quite like it to be a relatively flat structure, so not too many lines of management, anywhere it's useful, and that it was somewhere where people really felt like they could do their best work and that they've got autonomy to do that. And then obviously if you're doing that, you're getting quite a lot of development along the way as well.
I love that. I'm sure many people will want to work for your organization. Okay, so I have two more questions. So, do you have any advice to those who want to change their career path completely?
Yeah, so I think probably I would say to try and break it down into what feels like manageable steps. Because if you're going to change career completely, lots of people do that. And I think, yeah, it's about working out the easiest way to do it, but I guess also the safest way, because for a lot of people that means potentially a change in salary. And that's obviously usually a barrier for people. So I guess it's thinking about if you do need to get a qualification, other ways you could get funding through that, for example, or if it's nothing to do with the qualification and you just want to change sectors, then I think it's about what I was saying earlier around really being able to articulate why you want to move, so that any recruiter you might come across, any organization, that you can explain to them, really for example, could you explain it in 2 minutes why you want to do that and what are your transferable skills? And I think mapping those out is really helpful, because then it does make you see how much of those skills you've got and how much of your experience would be really useful in another sector.
Yes, yes, great advice. Thank you so much for sharing that. I actually got two more, sorry.
That's
I just
okay.
So what's the best advice you have ever received in your life?
Oh, I think probably it was to quit a job and get another one. So one of my roles, it was quite a toxic culture, I would say. Like, um, some people enjoyed working there, most people probably didn't. And we were struggling to change it. So I, at that point, wasn't on a leadership team. Um, I couldn't really influence any change, and I was kind of already aware that there was nothing about that job that was exciting me, and that's normally my cue to find another role. Like, I can't see the impact I'm making, doesn't feel like I'm having a positive impact. That means it's time for me to move on. But I was still quite early on in my career, and so I was a bit like, I've only been in this job for a little while. Maybe it look like I'm hopping around. Maybe I should just stick it out for a bit. Maybe this is just what most jobs are like. And I was in a meeting and there was an external person there. And the meeting was quite a stormy meeting. It wasn't going well. People sort of arguing. And this was an external person there. So not great, not very professional environment. And the next day, the external person, she called me to follow up on the meeting, but also at the end of the call, she'd said, I just obviously it's none of my business, but I just want to say I thought you'd handled yourself really well in that meeting, and maybe you should just think about where else you could have an impact instead. And that really surprised me. One, that she'd said it, and it was really nice for her to say it because she was doing it from a supportive point of view. And I was so embarrassed because that meeting had been so awful. But yeah, so when she'd said, like, just go somewhere else, like find somewhere better, and she was absolutely right. And then when I thought about it, I thought, yeah, like, why am I staying here? I don't enjoy this job anymore. And I was lucky enough to be able to just quit and go and find another job. So that was probably the best advice I ever had.
Wow, that's very nice of her to tell you that. To tell you that you've done a great job in that meeting, you handled it well, but also like I'm sure there's somewhere else where you can make bigger impact than in this current job. Wow, that's that's a great advice. Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. That's quite inspiring to hear that there's people out there who are willing to, just call up and give that advice to someone. Was this person the first? Is it the first time you met this person, or did you know this person?
Yeah, so she'd been supporting her organisation doing a piece of work for probably a couple of months before that, and then that meeting was the last time she was going to be involved with us.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I think it was probably just seeing how the organisation was working,
Mm,
and we'd obviously had a good working relationship. So I think it was, from like almost like that mentor point of view. She again
mhm,
was quite a bit older than me, um, and I think yeah, maybe she'd had a similar experience, and she thought, I wish someone had told me, like, stop worrying
mm.
about the what ifs and just go and find something better.
Yes, yes, that's a great point you made there. That I'm sure she probably had a similar experience. And it's usually like, oh, I wish someone had told me this, and you just feel like, oh, you just need to tell that person. Well, I wish I had, when I was younger. So yeah, that's a great point. So final question. What advice would you give to those who are trying to follow their passion but feeling challenged to do so or struggling to do so? Because I know you support your husband with his writing, since you guys met. And I know that you do this kind of very amazingly. And I know that your husband really appreciate that. So yeah, I would love to hear if you could advise to those who are doing similar thing. What would you say to them?
Yeah. So I think actually having an external viewpoint can be really helpful. And I think we talked about sort of coaches and mentors earlier, and I do think that can be so helpful because it just there's someone else who's who doesn't have any bias towards you. They don't have any vested interest, and they are just there in that role to support you and to help you with whatever you want to do. So I think just having that external voice can be really helpful. And there's obviously a mentor or coach could come from anywhere. There's lots of different places. Um, so I do quite a lot of mentoring through the CIPD. So it's all
Mhm,
kind of volunteer programs, etc. And I tend to try and support people who are right at the start of their HR careers, and where they're trying to build their passion for their career. But yeah, I do think having that external voice is helpful because they're not just going to say to you, it's all brilliant, you're doing fine. Like you might be, but equally it's quite hard if sometimes if you're trying to change something in your life. So
mhm,
having someone that will be positive but also will push you a little bit as well, to especially if it's stepping out of your comfort zone, I think that's helpful. um and it doesn't have to cost anything, or it can do. You can obviously pay for coaches as well, but I do think having that external voice can really just help you. um Maybe it's the autonomy of it, because obviously friends and family are really helpful for that, but of course they're coming at it from a different viewpoint, so that more neutral sounding board I think can be really helpful.
mm. Yes, such a great advice. Um, Just follow up on that. What would you say to those who are kind of struggling to find coaches or mentors, or the right coaches or right mentors? Yeah, because from my experience, I struggle finding the right coaches and mentors for me. So, what would you say to those people?
Yeah, and there is so many possibilities out there, isn't there? So I think if it's a profession, quite a lot of membership bodies offer things like mentoring or coaching opportunities. So I think they're always a good place to start. But equally, depending on what you want to do, sometimes there is a membership body for that, or they might be really small, they might not be able to offer that. So then I think you're probably looking a bit wider. Um, and I think if you are then, I guess, almost Google searching for coaches and
Mhm,
mentors, um, then I think there's probably a few things to think about. One of which is kind of, what that person does, because there's some absolutely amazing coaches and mentors, and then there's other people who just won't suit you, and that's fine. So I think it is about trying to find the chemistry and the right person and their approach, because again, coaches are really different in how they do
mm,
that. So finding the right match for you. I think most people would be really happy to have an initial chat with you and see if that chemistry is right or not, and if it's not, then it's nothing personal on either side. So I think, yeah, just spending a bit of time chatting to people or getting recommendations as well. So if you're in any sort of professional network, so like maybe LinkedIn or on any other sort of social media platform, asking for recommendations, I think is helpful. Because other people, if they've had a great experience, will always share that. So that's helpful, I think. So you're not going in thinking there's like 100 people I could pick from here. I don't know where to start.
Yes, yes, yeah, there are so many out there these days. Thank you so much for sharing that, and thank you so much for your time and this amazing conversation. If people want to get in touch with you, where can people find you?
LinkedIn is probably the easiest. Yeah, Jessica Badley. You'll find me quite easily on there.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jess. Thank you. And yeah, take care. Have a good Friday afternoon and weekend.
You
Thank
too.
you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed listening to my conversation with Jess. I definitely learned a lot, and I really love her approach to recruitment and creating a safe space for people to speak up and provide feedback. I will definitely be sharing this with my colleagues at work. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next episode.